Now welcome our first speaker of the day, Mary Robinette Kowal, speaking of the engineering of worlds. She is a sci-fi writer, puppeteer, and narrator. So we're all excited to listen to Mary Robinette. So I hope you grabbed your popcorn like yesterday. I'll try and send some to everyone out there if you don't have any. Hopefully everyone has a great day, and welcome to the show. We're going to snap back again. Day 2, take 1.
Thank you. I am delighted to be here. So I'm going to be talking to you about the engineering of worlds. Data is only as useful as the questions you ask. So let's start with the first question. Why are you listening to a science fiction writer? I mean, besides the fact that a lot of you entered the field due to science fiction. Humans are made of narratives. Our stories seep out in a myriad of ways, from answering how was your day to trying to explain a project and a grant. As a science fiction writer, my job essentially involves taking the real world and then tipping it on its side to examine the connective tissue. I build stories, yes, but in order for the stories to resonate with an audience, they have to be built from recognizable patterns. So today, I'm going to give you a quick overview of narrative structure and explain how it can be a tool to help you frame better questions in the real world. We will look at how this approach can help you generate new ideas and provide a clear path for stepping outside your knowledge base to solve problems. So basically, I'm here to give you some narrative tools to help with communication and problem solving. So let's start with the mice quotient. And here is where we get PowerPoint. Whee! So the mice quotient is an acronym. It turns out that basically every story, fiction and nonfiction, can be explained through a fairly simple organizational theory. I'm going to talk about this through a lens of fiction, and we'll circle back and talk about how to apply it in the real world to identify weaknesses, gaps, and barriers. Stories are made of 4 elements, mixed in different proportions: milieu, inquiries, characters, and events. These elements can help determine where a story starts and stops and the kinds of conflicts your characters face. Milieu stories are driven by place. These stories begin when a character enters a place and end when they exit it. So things like Gulliver's Travels, Around the World in 80 Days are classic examples. So knowing where a milieu story ends, this also tells you the kind of conflicts that go in the middle, because your job is to figure out what your character needs to do and then systematically deny them the solution. As a novelist, this is not a good strategy for a project manager. But it's important to understand that conflicts stop your characters from reaching their goals. So knowing where milieu stories end, this also tells you the conflicts that go in the middle. If a milieu conflict ends when your character exits a place, the conflicts keep the character from leaving. These are things like struggling to exit, trying to survive in, attempting to escape the gravity well, attempting to navigate. Inquiry stories are driven by questions. They begin when a character has a question and end when they answer it. It's a super complicated structure. So these are mystery stories like Sherlock Holmes or Poirot. For an inquiry conflict, your goal is to keep your character from finding the answer. They're lied to. They can't understand the answer. The answers lead to dead ends, red herrings. Character stories are driven by angst. They begin when a character is unhappy with an aspect of self, and they end when they solidify their self-definition. Coming-of-age stories, romances. Basically, your character is trying to change. Stop them. Don't let them break out of their role. Fill them with self-loathing. Have the change backfire. Event stories are driven by action. These begin when the status quo is disrupted and end when it's restored or where there's a new status quo. And yes, everyone dies counts as a new status quo. These are disaster stories. Inferno, Deep Impact. My rocket has just exploded. By this point, you understand the drill. These stories end when the status quo is restored or there's a new status quo. So don't let your character restore the status quo. In fiction, that's fight scenes, chase scenes, explosions. They try to set things right. It has unintended consequences. Just be mean. That's your job. Again, as a novelist, not as a project manager. Now, it's easy to confuse character stories and event stories. Character stories are about internal conflicts. I'll never be good at this. Event stories are about external conflicts. Oh no, an asteroid is coming at the Earth. So that's what the individual mice elements look like. But you almost never see single thread stories. Most stories are made up of multiple threads, honestly, because single thread stories are really dull. And also, that's not how the world actually works. So how do you handle multiple conflicts happening simultaneously? For most people on this call, this slide explains everything. I don't actually have to talk right now, but I will anyway. So it's basically nesting code. You tackle things first in, last out. So to use a concrete example, let's look at The Wizard of Oz, which is a beautifully narrated, nested story. It begins as a character story. Dorothy is dissatisfied with her role as a Kansas farm girl. Then event, tornado. Then we open the milieu, welcome to Oz. And then inquiry, what do the ruby slippers do? And then we get to the end of the film, and Glinda says, the ruby slippers will carry you home. Which honestly, if she had just said at the beginning, the film would have been so much shorter. But that closes the inquiry. Then Dorothy leaves Oz, closing the milieu. She returns to Kansas, where everything is fine. And then Dorothy says, I didn't need to go looking any farther for adventure than my own backyard. Closing characters. So when you have stories that feel like the ending fizzles, or the ones that end and then end again and again and again, that's because the nesting code is broken. So that's how things work in fiction. Let's take a look at the real world. In nonfiction or the real world, milieu is environment. It's the places that you inhabit and the places that you are trying to navigate through. Inquire just the questions that you have, the search for information. Characters are the people in your world, yourself and others. And events are the status quo and attempts to change them. So that is, as I attempt to, okay, I have now exited. That's how those things work. Now, I said before that in order for fiction to resonate with readers, it has to mimic the patterns from the real world. The things that satisfy us in life satisfy us in stories. The reverse is also true. What the mice quotient is very good at is helping to define the parameters of the problem and then through that identify the available paths to the solution. So to take the mice quotient and apply it to the real world, we have to turn it inside out. Now here's the first thing to understand. You are the main character in your own story. And so is everyone else. And your stories intersect. This is why things get messy, because you have multiple goals that are competing against each other. So think of a problem that you're facing at work. Now, are you trying to escape or navigate a place? Website, gravity well. That's a milieu story. Are you struggling to get information? That's an inquiry story. Is there a problem with the team dynamic? Are you unhappy with yourself? You didn't know this was going to get deep, did you? Or like you feel like you don't have the skills to do the job. That's a character story. And yes, a team is a character. What about your status quo? Are you trying to change that or redefine normal? That's an event story. The real world is messier than stories. So all of the threads are running simultaneously. The mice quotient allows me to identify the aspects, this is what happens when you attempt to do two slides at the same time. The mice quotient allows me to identify the actual problem and then identify something that we call the area of intention to come up with a solution. This is basically the underlying reason that you're doing something, the area of intention. It's easy to get caught up in trying to fix a roadblock, and we just focus on the roadblock to the point that we forget what our actual intention was. The area of intention is the problem you're trying to solve, the actual problem. So ask yourself, is what you're trying to solve the actual problem, or is it just the problem that's in front of you? What is your area of intention? So let's use a real world example that I hope you'll find relatable. Here in the pandemic, my husband and I have moved in with my parents. It's actually great. There's 12 acres, a mother-in-law apartment. I've made my own tiny little recording studio. We have a slightly larger social service circle, my husband and my parents, and no privacy. Like, you know what it's like trying to work when people are there all the time, all the time. I'm a novelist, and I was frankly having a really hard time writing. In the before times, I would have gone to a coffee shop to try to get focus. But hello, pandemic, not going to do that. I was feeling trapped. That's a milieu story. Now, it's a story that was triggered by an event, but I wasn't trying to solve the pandemic, right? And I didn't feel lonely, so it wasn't a character story. It wasn't going to be solved by yet another Zoom meeting. I was trying to navigate and escape from the place that I was in, which meant that my solutions were also going to come from a manipulation of my environment. I didn't need to figure out how to mask up safely and go out and get coffee. Getting coffee wasn't the problem. I wasn't trying to restore the status quo of a cup of coffee, although I'll admit that I would like that. I just needed a different place to write. So now I have a tiny greenhouse that is out in the woods, and I've got a cord and a little table and a space heater, and I can go out and sit in the woods in winter and still be warm. And I have a different environment to be in which it is, if someone wants to come bother me, I can see them coming. But I solved it by treating it like a milieu problem. So here's another example. Inquiry. With my novel Calculating Stars, it's basically Apollo-era science fiction. And there's a lot of jargon, like a lot of jargon. Well, the first thing that happens in the novel, and this is not a spoiler because it's literally on the first page, is that a meteorite slams into Washington, D.C. And there's a point in the novel where my character needs to calculate how big that meteorite was. This is actually a pretty straightforward question. There's a lot of science about how to work backwards to figure out how to do this. A Google search turned up the answer for how to figure out the size of the meteorite. The problem was, I am a novelist. I am really not in any way at all. Like, I was an art major in college. I spent 20 years as a professional puppeteer. I read audiobooks out loud. I was not equipped to answer that question. But the amount of information that I needed to understand in order to write what was essentially a single line of dialogue. I mean, there's a reason that you people have degrees that are not the degree that I have. So again, I looked at my area of intention, and that was to have the information necessary to be able to write this one line. It wasn't to change myself to be able to understand these things. It wasn't actually a character story. I'm perfectly content with my role as a novelist. It was to be able to just write that line. So rather than trying to learn all of the things, I outsourced it and I asked an expert. My manuscripts often read like, and then she said, bracket, jargon, bracket. And then I send it off to someone and I'm like, hey, do you want to play Mad Libs? Thanks. So that was an inquiry story. And the way I solved it was by looking at my area of intention, which was to gain the information, and then found a different way to gain that information. Character story. So we identify along several different axes. We identify ourselves. by our abilities, our roles, and our relationships, and our status. Ability is basically the skills that you have, the things that you can and cannot do. It's also the things that you are physically capable and not capable of, the things that you think you can understand versus the things you can't. Roles are the tasks that you do, the day-to-day aspects of the job. Relationships are about loyalties, who you regard as part of your group, who you regard kind of as part of yourself. And status is about power. It's about where you stand in a hierarchy and the things that you are and are not empowered to do. So, what do we do with that? I have multiple parts of my life. Everybody does. So I define in ability, I'm a very good puppeteer. I'm a competent writer. I have Hugo Awards, but imposter syndrome, it's its own special thing. But those are the abilities that I have. I'm terrible at tracking time. Abilities, things I can and cannot do. Roles are the tasks that I do. So those are things like sitting down to write. Those are things like going to auditions for the puppetry. Relationship is loyalties. I'm a daughter. I'm a sister. I'm a wife. I'm a mentor. Those are the relationships that I have. And then status is about power. I'm middle class. I'm a science fiction novelist. When I'm at a Worldcon, World Science Fiction Convention, that's pretty high status. When I am talking to a room full of actual rocket scientists, I have to tell you, my status does not feel like I'm feeling. There's the imposter syndrome is indeed significant. When I'm on an airplane in the before times and I tell people that I'm a science fiction writer, it's like, oh, I used to love that when I was a kid. Status, not so great there. But all of those things make up me, right? Sometimes those aspects of self come into conflict with each other. Real world example. I was faced with a situation where my role came into direct conflict with my relationships. I had an audition for Sesame Street, which is really cool, right? The audition went really well. And they said, if you get a call back, it's going to be on November 7th. My problem was, as a daughter, my mom was getting her first service dog. She has Parkinson's. I had arranged for her to get this service dog, and it was so great. Except the service dog was supposed to arrive on, yes, November 7th. So I had to make a choice. Was I going to go to the audition and prioritize that aspect of self, the role, or was I going to stay home as I had promised and help my mom with the dog, prioritizing the relationship? These two things were in direct conflict with each other. So again, recognizing that, the thing that I have to look at is my area of intention. Which piece of myself is the piece that I want to prioritize? Now, in that particular example, as it happens, I did not get the call back. I have never been so happy to not get something. So with a team, it's important to understand that teams are characters. If your team is having problems performing, take a look at why. Do they have the skills they need? If not, then education or adding someone with a new skill set might be necessary. Roles. Are there more tasks than they have time? Are the tasks clearly assigned? Relationships. Do they know each other well enough to care and communicate? Do they feel like a cohesive whole? If they don't, that's when you might need to trot out a team building exercise or arrange social time. Status. Do they feel empowered to do the work? Do they understand where they are in the hierarchy? Do they get above what they are allowed to do? Check those things out. And then event. So getting a grant is a change of status. If you want to try to make a change, you have to convince people that your vision is worth funding. And even good events can throw you off kilter. So here's an event example. Pandemic, right? One of the things that happened in the pandemic was that I was having difficulty getting work done. My assistant was also having difficulty getting work done because of this change in status quo. And now I had a choice there. I could have fired her and gotten a different assistant, or I could have done what I did, which was to look at my area of intention. My area of intention was to get the work done, but I didn't actually care who did it. And she was really good at the things she was really good at. So what I did was I brought another person on. I changed the status quo of the group that I was working with so that we were able to continue getting the work done. These are the things that you're looking at. And with those, you're going to be looking at one final piece. And that is why, how, and with what effect. Why represents the past. It's all the things that led to the current moment. And very specifically, it contains the reason that you are doing the work, your area of intention. How is about the present. It's all the way all of the decisions manifest. And with what effect represents the future. It's not just the place you're aiming, but also the ripple effects. So let's take a look at this very fast in take those questions out for a spin. Self-driving cars. Why are self-driving cars being developed? So is it for accessibility? To allow people with disabilities or the elderly greater independence? Is it to free up time to work on other work? Is it for fuel efficiency? Once you know that why, then you proceed to how. How does this manifest? So let's say that we decided that our area of intention was that we're making these for accessibility. So they'll need to have ramps for mobility devices. They need audio cues for blind passengers, visual cues for deaf passengers. They'll need to be roomier inside. But if I'm starting from a different why, from a different area of intention, and it's all about fuel efficiency, then they're going to be stripped down. They're going to be so streamlined. And if it's for a different one yet to create time for work, then they're going to have desks inside and all of the USB plugs you could want. And let's be honest, they will have fully reclining seats for nap time. With what effect? This is about the future ripple effects of whatever decision you started from. So with the accessibility track, that means maybe wider parking areas, whereas the efficiency route might lead to more shared rides and centralized drop-off points. Both of these are going to affect city planning, but in totally different directions. And the efficiency route could accidentally exclude mobility device users because that wasn't part of the initial why. That wasn't part of the area of intention. So creating new worlds, affecting your environment, means constantly asking those three questions: why, how, and with what effect, and then figuring out which barriers are preventing you from moving forward. Are you in a milieu story? Are you in inquiry? Are you dealing with character problems or events? Are you trying to change the status quo? And really, that's why we're all here today, is to try to change the status quo and to find new ways to explore. But you're also here for an inquiry, which brings us to the Q&A portion of the afternoon, in which we get to ask a question and then answer it, having a series of very fast inquiry stories. And I am willing to answer any question you want to ask. It can be about the presentation. If you want to ask questions about books, totally fair game. If you want to ask about dealing with trying to be creative and depression, also very open. So all of that, let's see if there are other questions at all. Otherwise, I will carry on.
So Mary Robinette, we
Yes.
have questions, and we have a time slot for those questions at the end of your presentation. So if you would like to continue your presentation, then we can grab the questions at the end, or we can start
sorry,
if you
that
prefer.
Ask now.
I was at the end of my presentation. I can present more things.
Let's do it.
And I can't hear whoever is speaking right now.
Apologize. Thank you so much for your presentation, Mary Robinette. That was wonderful, and I'm excited at the possibilities that your presentation exposes. We have a number of questions in our Q&A section, and much of them have been with regard to the area of intention. But prior to that, there's a pretty good question here. Is there some material, a book, a video, papers, etc., that could help us understand and think more about the view of teams that you're talking about, and how it can help teams and leadership do their work better?
Sure. So there's one that I would actually recommend, which is not specifically designed for this, but it was one of the ones that very much helped me, and that was it's a book called "Why Are All the Black Kids Sitting Together in the Cafeteria?" It's a sociology book, and what it talks about are the axes of power that we all exist on. And it's important to understand that everybody has a different has different things where they have power and where they don't have power. And once you understand that, then when you are looking at your team composition, you're able to identify the areas where people are empowered and the areas where they may feel disenfranchised, and can help shore them up. So that's one that I would recommend. The other one, the aspects of self that I talked about is actually my own framing. So I have a deep dive video that I have on my Patreon, and I'm just going to make a note that I've been meaning to make some of these public. So I'm making a note to self that I'm going to add that to my YouTube channel.
That's great. And we can actually put it at the NARI website as well. So any information that is forthcoming, we can apply there. There's been a lot of activity in the Q&A area. Again, this is a great question, and I think it gets probably to the heart of the matter. What do you feel is the most important aspect in telling or sharing a story? The message, the audience, other?
All of the above. So let me explain. Narrative, storytelling, novels, grant writing, whatever. Each of these comes with a framework, and it's a pretty like when you have to write a grant. There's a pretty rigid framework you have to follow. It's you have to write grants for nonprofit. They're different, but grant writing is still grant writing. It's about telling the story. When you're trying to get funding for something, it's about telling the story. So that is think of it as a clear glass pitcher, and you can put anything in that clear glass pitcher you want, right? So you could put hot apple cider. You could put sangria. You could put oatmeal. You can put anything in there you want. Your reader, your viewer, the person you're talking to, is going to come to you with their own vessel. And you don't know what vessel they're going to walk up to you with, right? So if someone comes up to you with a insulated travel mug, then pouring the hot apple cider in there, no problem. Great, good to go. If they come up to you with a Riedel wine glass and you try to pour hot apple cider in it, it's very likely to shatter, because it's not prepared, it's not tempered. Similarly, sangria going into a sippy cup, it's never going to work. Those pieces of apple are just going to bounce off the top. It's going to be a disaster. Also, why are you giving a toddler sangria? I mean, Okay, never mind. So it's important to think about to the degree that you can about what vessel you're going to be pouring something into, as well as what you want to put into that picture. So that's what I'm like. It's both. Everything happens in a space that is between the teller and the audience, and so you have to figure out where they're coming from in order to present the best message.
Understood. Scientists, engineers throughout history have looked to nature as a analogy or to the problems that they're trying to solve, or to expose how to resolve a problem. You know, the Wright brothers with birds. Some of the science fiction history, you know, Arthur C. Clarke had stated it best that technology, advanced technology, is indistinguishable from magic.
Mm-hmm.
And I would argue that much of what NASA does is along those pathways. If the common, or not, I shouldn't say that, the people reading or interested at NASA that are non-engineers, non-scientists tend to look at this as magic stuff, and it's very interesting. How do you convey that understanding to those that don't have a technical background, and in so doing, is it a way to look at the problem differently, not from a non-technical perspective, that allows you to have a kind of a richer environment to draw from in order to solve that problem?
Sure. So the biggest problem that I run into when I'm talking to engineers, and my dad is an engineer. I love you people, and also there is a desire to try to explain all of the things, and especially when it's a field that you're excited about, you want people to know everything, and it's also difficult for you to know what is not common knowledge because you're so steeped in it. So again, what I recommend is looking at your area of intention. Like, what is the one piece of knowledge that is preventing them from moving forward? You know, like what is the person that I'm speaking to trying to accomplish? So here's my magic rock. Okay. You know, this is it. It's like, if I say, how does this work to someone? I'm not asking them to tell me about relays and all of that. I'm asking them to tell me, where is the on button? So what you have to figure out then is, what is the most essential piece of information that this person is asking for? What problem are they trying to solve? And then give them that information so that you are trying to actively not be a barrier by helping identify the problem and then delivering the solution that they are looking for.
Nice. And this kind of goes in line with, again, the area of intention concept. So one of the questions is, I think, is in line with this, and I think this is an important question. Do you have an idea for the entire story arc before you begin writing? And before answering that, I think, in looking at the science aspect, the engineering aspect, many are looking at a problem to solve and not necessarily looking at it from a storyline perspective. Your thoughts?
Yeah. So the way I write, and every writer understands, is different, and every project is different. But I come up with a basic thumbnail sketch that tells me the beginning, middle, and end of the story. Here is the problem that my character has. This is the type of conflicts that my character is going to face in the middle, and this is what the solution is going to look like. But I don't, in that initial thing, I don't get too deep into the weeds on the kinds of conflicts that my character is going to encounter, because I often will discover those as I go, and sometimes things will, you know, in real life as well. You know that you've got your eye on the goal, but you don't necessarily know the things that are going to get in there. Using an analogy from my days back as an art major, when I was taught to draw a straight line, my instructor said, what you have to do is you put your pencil on the paper And then you look at where you want the line to go, and you move your hand to that point. What people make a mistake in doing is that they keep their eye on the pencil instead of on the goal, and they lose track, and that's when you get the wobbly line. So that is what I try to do when I'm writing, is to keep my eye on the goal, and also when moving through the world in general.
So one of the things that jumped out at me when you were talking about research, one of the challenges is how wonderful would it be for scientists, engineers to have a database like Google that they could go to address all of their questions. The challenge for engineers and scientists are that they're actually coming up with the answers to the questions that they're also coming up with over time. Within writing, within this storyline, we see things throughout history, like Gene Roddenberry's warp drive. He created this solution to a problem for the great distances within space. And now, because of scientists like Alcubierre, we're now adding science to that solution and actually divining it to the point where warp drive actually may be a thing in the distant future, but it's actually scientific. It's a process that scientists and engineers have applied their skill set to. So
I love questions like this so much, and there's so many different ways that you can go with this kind of thing, that crossover between fiction and science. And with that in mind, I feel like we should probably actually turn it over back to the actual scientists, because I am noting that that we should. That I think we are completely out of time. So I'm gonna, if that's okay, I'm gonna pass this back over to Angela, and for anyone who wants to ask me more questions, I am available on Twitter at Mary Robinette, and I'll just be around. Angela, back to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mary Robinette. That was a great example of storytelling, and kind of kicking us off for the day later with the Hollywood Blacklist and some future discussions on partnerships. Next, we're going to opening up into our university innovation portion of the showcase. So we're going to start you off with a kickoff video for university innovation. Thank you.